What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Blue Box Nerd. Thank you for coming back. Thank you for joining us on this epic journey. I'm your animated host, Anthony, and each week we'll be bringing you some deep dives and intelligent discussions about everything nerd. From movies to TV shows and everything in between, we cover it all. So hit the like button and get subscribed so you don't miss anything. Today we continue episode 3 of The Last of Us on HBO, one of my favorite episodes of the series so far. As always, we don't spoil anything that will be upcoming in the story, but we will be discussing the episode scene by scene. So if you haven't seen episode 3 yet, this is your spoiler warning. This week we actually don't get a cold open for the first time this season. It goes straight to the intro for the first time, but I think it's because of the time jumps that we get a little bit later. Immediately after the intro, we see Joel reaching his busted knuckle into the cold water, which probably feels amazing considering how beat up his hand is. He reaches in and grabs a rock, and we get to see a different side of Joel here. He's practicing stone balancing, which is an ancient practice used by cultural and artistic purposes, but mostly practiced today in the form of yoga, a form of relaxation through concentration, and we see Joel is already 7 layers deep in this tower. Then we see that we are actually 10 miles west of Boston, and probably just a few hours away from Bill and Frank's house. Ellie's just curled up in the camp with Joel's jacket over her. It's also a nod to the game because she ends up wearing his jacket for a big part of the story later on. He grabs the tiniest piece of food and goes to put the rest away, but instead throws the rest at Ellie because she's probably run out of chicken sandwiches by now. You can sense the awkwardness between the two, and Ellie tries to speak but is shut down by Joel immediately. He doesn't want an apology for what happened to Tess. Instead, Ellie says she wasn't going to apologize, and that she shouldn't be blamed for something that wasn't her fault. Gotta say, the girl's got a point. Joel didn't have to accept this mission, so he shouldn't be mad at her for something that's not her fault. I honestly don't think that Joel was mad at her. He just internalizes his emotions, so she took his silence for anger. And when he realizes that his silence is being perceived that way, I think he gives her a soft nod, basically putting her at ease. Then Joel tells her that it's about a 5-hour hike until they get there, so Ellie's ready to go. But during their hike, you can see that, again, they walk in silence. Joel even marches ahead of her to avoid conversation. He's still on a mission, and Ellie is just tagging along for the ride. Now, when she catches up with him, she asks him that if he's traveled this way before and there are no infected, what is he looking out for? He looks really paranoid. And his response is people, and that tells you where his mind is. In the game, people end up being a way bigger threat than the infected. Just like The Walking Dead, it's not a story about zombies or the infection itself. It's a story about how people deal with existential threats and how they behave towards each other and why. Now, she asks him about the scar on his head, and he reveals that someone shot at him and missed, and that he also missed when he shot back. It happens more often than you think. In the heat of the moment, people start to shake, nerves and tensions are high, and the probability of missing your target increases. And here, yet again, she tries to ask for a gun.
Just the two of us. I was thinking I should
And he shuts her down immediately. Unlike The Walking Dead, these sets are way older and severely aged. The down phone pole looks like it's been on the floor for quite some time, and the Cumberland Farms grocery store they come across, it looks like nature has almost completely retaken it. This is a real store chain, and they are mostly in the Massachusetts area, which is where the episode takes place. It's not really a nod to the game, but it's a nice attention to detail for the show. Now, when they go inside, Joel starts looking for a cache that he left behind, sort of a stash, along some sort of route that him and Tess had. And Ellie immediately finds the Mortal Kombat 2 arcade machine, a nod to the game of the 90s. In the game, she comes across an arcade machine, but it's for a game that doesn't really exist, so I'm glad that since Warner Brothers owns the rights to Mortal Kombat, why not put it in? The fatality that Ellie references in the show was a real fatality you could do in the game.
There's this one character named Melina who takes off her mask and she has monster teeth and then she swallows you whole and barfs out your bones.
So apparently Joel and Tess used to hide stashes along certain routes in case they needed supplies, but it's been a long time since Joel has been here, so he has a hard time finding where he left it. And here Joel delivers his famous dad joke for the second time.
Is there anything bad in here?
Just you.
Getting funnier.
And while exploring some of the back rooms of the store, she comes across a latch on the ground leading to some sort of basement storage. Interesting how she tries to hide it from Joel, almost like she wants to be the one that finds the stash first. But when she makes it down there, you can see that there used to be stairs to some sort of basement, but they have been taken down for quite some time, so she actually has to drop into it. Here we get another great shot where she's in the light, almost propped up by a small hill, surrounded by darkness. She makes sure that she has a way out, by grabbing the trash can and flipping it upside down. And this is where we find the lockers and metal shells, which is a recurring thing across the games, where Joel and Ellie find med packs and ammo. It looks like all of these have been picked clean, except for the single Tampax box, which she quickly grabs. I would imagine these things are pretty hard to come by at this point, so this is probably a luxury for her. But the joy doesn't last very long when we're reminded by the crushed runner on the floor that you can't let your guard down even for a second. It looks like this person may have been living down here for some time and was crushed when some of the cement blocks came down on them. Then when she gets closer, you can see that they can't move and that their face shows that they are not fully a clicker yet, but not a runner either. The sound design is amazing. You can actually hear the difficulty breathing. Then they try a few clicks, almost as if they're learning how to do it, while losing the humanity in the process. Then Ellie does something that no other human can do. She gets face to face with it. It's interesting to see when she moves the knife, it follows it with his eye. Now Ellie, knowing that it can't move or it can't infect her in any way, she cuts into it. I think this is her trying to figure out for herself if these things are still human, even though the infection is this bad. But there is no blood at all. Inside you just see the fibers of the fungus. It's almost completely fungus at this point. Then you can see her emotions turn to anger, almost as if saying, something so harmless to me can have such a devastating effect on the world, killing everyone around her and making her watch and stay alone. It's like the fungus is playing a cruel trick on her. She finally takes out her anger on this thing by sticking a knife right through the brain. When we cut back to Joel, we see that he's found his stash finally. When he hears Ellie climbing back up to the store, you can see Joel's concern for her. He doesn't know what the sound is, so he instinctively pulls out the gun and starts calling out for her. Joel then starts putting his things back into the stash, and Ellie notices that he's putting away the rifle. So she asks him why is he leaving that behind, and he explains that there's not much ammo for it out there anyway, so it's kind of useless. Then she says,
"Oh, you're just gonna leave it there?"
And he replies with no, like, we're not just gonna leave it here. It's now part of this stash and we can come back for it when we find bullets. So then they take off on foot again, fully supplied, when they come across a crashed airplane. We're actually not that far from where the planes crashed in the first episode, so maybe this is the wreckage of one of those planes. Ellie asks if Joel has ever flown in one of those before, and when he tells her,
a few times, sure.
So lucky.
she calls him lucky. She never got to do things that kids nowadays take for granted, like flying in an airplane or playing in a mall arcade. Now, the conversation that they have here is important exposition. It's her asking why it took over so quickly, meaning the virus, or the infection. Everything came down in one day. She explains how at her school she was taught the FEDRA-approved curriculum of the shitty government fails to control a pandemic, but she wants to know more. If it spread from biting, then who bit the first person? Then, he kind of explains to her how Cordiceps actually mutated and got into the food supply, like the grain we spoke about in the last episode. So it infected a mass number of people at the same time. Flour and sugar are actually in everything, and a lot of the food is controlled by a few major brands, so different types of food were actually infected. Breads, cereals, and he ends with pancake mix, which, if we remember, is what Tommy wanted to eat on the day of the outbreak for Joel's birthday. They were actually out, so Sarah and Joel made eggs and bacon instead. He explains that the tainted food goes into the grocery stores on Thursday night. Friday morning, people eat breakfast, and they all get infected at the same time, roughly. As the day goes on, people get sick, and by the afternoon and evening time, they are fully infected and they start biting. Friday night, September 26, 2003, his birthday.
By Monday, everything was gone.
I like the moment when she thanks him because she had a theory about it being started with monkeys, but now she knows the truth, and he actually realizes that he's actually her mentor, her teacher. He tries to get her to cut through the woods, and he says it's because there are some things that he doesn't want her to see, and, of course, Ellie now says that she has to see what it is. Then she asks, "Can it hurt me?" And when he says no, she accuses him of being too honest, which tells you a little bit more about her character. She quickly finds out that it was actually a body pit. Bones and clothing are all that's left of the remains of the people he explains were murdered by FEDRA. They just rounded up all the people that lived in the rural areas of the country and they just executed them by the masses as part of their quarantine procedures. This is when we get another small nugget of the violence and extreme measures that FEDRA is willing to go to keep people in the QZ safe. Ellie, of course, quickly realizes that they weren't actually sick. They were just executed. He explains that they actually lied to the people, telling them that they were going to be safely transported to a QZ, but instead they were all executed and thrown in a ditch. And then we get a great transition into our first time jump of the episode. We were taken back to the time of the execution, and we see that the cloth that was flapping on the wind belonged to a mother and her child on September 30th, 2003. So you can see this was just 4 days after the outbreak. Fedra has already been formed, and they are already tagging people's doors with red X's. They don't really go into detail about what these symbols mean, but just by looking at them, we can tell that they are marking these families for execution. Now, one particular house has an excellent surveillance system, and we see that the man behind the camera is our friend Bill. Here we get to see that he is in a dark room with a Windows 2000 PC, which is nice attention to detail, which is the Windows version that was out at the time. And he is glued to the security monitors where he can see people just rounded up and put into trucks and hauled away. This part was not actually in the game, and I'm going to say that now because this is part of Bill's history that we never touch base in the game. So I'm so glad we got to see this here. This is one of my favorite episodes of the season because it delves so deep into a character that for gamers it was just temporary, but here we get to see what they were really like. His story is one of tragedy, triumph, an action love story like we've never seen portrayed on screen, at least not like this. We quickly get to see Bill's badassery here when he grabs his gun and walks into the darkness. The sound design is great because you can hear the people upstairs just walking around his house. He hears them say that the house is clear and that they're going to head out, and then we hear him say,
"Not today, you New World Order jackboot fucks."
Then we get our last look at the bunch of people that were hauled away for execution that Joel and Ellie run into. This sign is actually in the game, and it looks like a sign that was just recently used during our recent pandemic here in the real world. Now we cut back to reveal Bill's bunker. He was well stocked for the apocalypse, and I know a few people out there that would be marveling at this panic room. It has everything from books to a full arsenal and a full workbench with full security system. He puts on a gas mask and comes up through the trap door. When he finally makes it out, we see that he is completely alone. Everyone from the village has been cleared out, and he's actually happy. He seems almost giddy to be left alone. A town for one. So he immediately goes to work. He takes out the seats in his boat, and then he uses it to go looting throughout the town. He gets the most expensive gas. He fills up 3 barrels full of fuel. He breaks into the Home Depot and starts grabbing gear, and then the lights turn off. So he drives over to the gas plant, rams the gate, and shuts off the gas. I'm assuming to avoid a catastrophe. And of course, before getting back home, he stops and grabs something to drink. This man was a little thirsty after all that work. You can see that he's really comfortable on his own. He doesn't really care that everyone went away. He was actually ready for this. He even has his own massive generator. He's growing his own food, raising his own chickens, butchering his own meats. The choices he made allow him to live free and live off the land, away from the interference from Fedra, and eating the most delicious meal I've ever seen someone eat in the post-apocalyptic show ever. The man's got style. When it cuts back to the truck, we get a 4-year time jump, or progression, I guess, because the montage showed multiple stages of his journey to get to 2007. We can see that he's fenced himself off from the world, he's built some sort of fortress around him, and he's gotten used to checking the perimeter and staying safe with all the high-tech stuff everyone left behind. The dude is living it up, and you can tell he's lonely. He eats alone, lives alone, but he doesn't seem to mind it too much. He's actually thriving on his own. When we see him back in his bunker, he's working on something, and we see some of the flags and things that he has hanging up. First, we get the Gadsden flag, which was used during the American Revolution. It was used by the Continental Marines and proclaimed a warning of vigilance and willingness to act in defense against anyone. It's a timber rattlesnake on a sea of yellow with the words, "Don't tread on me." The second one we see is the Join or Die political cartoon showing the disunity of the American colonies. It's a snake cut up into 8 parts, each representing a colony. Then we get to see him getting his hands dirty in his shop. He's actually working on something here, but we can't really see what it is. When there's an alarm that goes off, and he turns immediately to the security monitors. He looks specifically at the monitor that is pointed towards the hole in the ground. And here we can see his Jurassic Park style gate system that he built just a short walk away from the hole in the ground. Here he discovers a man that's not infected. When he hears him speak, he immediately goes into defense mode. He starts looking around and see if this is an ambush or something else. This is when we get to meet Frank, a man just trying to get to Boston. We found out he's actually from the Baltimore QZ, which is gone. It looks like it was overrun by the infected and people are fleeing to Boston. He says that they started as a group of 10 and he's the only one that's left. He lowers a ladder down to Frank, but he's still super cautious, so he makes him wait there while he tests him. He points him in the direction of Boston and asks him to go, but then we see that he makes a final plea. He asks if he can have a little bit of food and sleep, at least for one night. Something pulls on his heartstrings, and I think it was his comment about Arby's that pulls on his heartstrings a little bit, and he lets him stay. While he's taking a shower, he brings him some clean clothes, but this feels weird to him. You can see how uncomfortable it's making him. He's gotten so used to being alone, and having someone else in the house just feels strange.
I left some clothes here for you.
Frank asks for 5 more minutes in the shower because of how amazing it is. And I can attest, a shower after a long hike really does feel rejuvenating. And this is when Bill realizes that the luxuries that he's awarded himself are luxuries that not everyone else has. And when I saw this shot, it pulled on my heartstrings because he finally has someone to sit with, someone he can spoil with his luxuries. He even fixes his plate after putting it down, showing that even plate presentation matters. This guy used to be a chef of some sort. He has serious culinary skills. He even knows the wine to pair with it. Frank, of course, immediately turns the plate back so that he can reach the meat better, and you can see that Frank's feelings were hurt a little bit. Frank is surprised of how good the food is, and then Bill says, anything tastes good when you're hungry, but this is different. This is probably the most amazing food he's ever had, period.
Everything tastes good when you're starving.
Yeah, but not like this.
Even the way he pours the wine is impressive. Now, this part is interesting because you can see that he's still not sure about this guy, but he's taken by him, even to the point where he forgets that he has a gun in his holster. He sees something in Frank. I also want to point out here that Frank is wearing Bill's plaid shirt, which Joel ends up wearing later on in the game. Fans of HBO will notice that Frank is being played by Murray Bartlett, which also stars in another HBO hit, The White Lotus. Now, here Bill offers Frank some more food, and he just can't. He's so full that he just can't eat another bite. An interesting sound design here. We actually hear a working grandfather clock, which later on in the episode, it's not working.
So I guess I'll be going then.
And after enjoying a great meal together, he tries to stall from leaving. So he tries to change the subject and looks around the house, and he sees the piano. This piano actually has a great significance in the game, so we'll probably see this baby again, but here we see the softer side of Bill. Not only is he an artist in the kitchen, he's an artist behind the keys. You can tell how uncomfortable he is when Frank starts looking through the sheet music because it's a side of him that he's never let anyone else see, and he's feeling vulnerable here. So he tries to play the song, but obviously it doesn't go as planned. He's not very experienced behind the piano, and it bothers Bill because that's one of his favorite songs. So he tries to stop him from playing, but Frank convinces him to play it for him, and then he'll leave. Turns out the song is Long, Long Time by Linda Ronstadt, which we now know that Frank picked out for a specific reason. In the short amount of time that they were together, he saw who Bill really was. Frank can see the emotion in Bill's face and knows that he's singing about someone.
Love will abide. Take things in stride. Sounds like good advice.
So when he finishes, he asks the question that all gay men ask when they want to know if someone else is gay without being too obvious.
So, who's the girl?
And he got the response that he wanted.
There is no girl.
They were immediately attracted to each other, and if there was ever a love at first sight moment, here it is. We see them share one of the most intimate scenes that we've ever seen on film, and it shows the awkwardness of new love. The idea of being vulnerable again in front of someone and have them accept you for who you are. Not only accept you, but love you for it. Bill and Frank forever. Then we cut to 3 years later, and it's 2010, and we see that they're bickering like an old married couple. Every relationship has their ups and downs, and Bill and Frank are no exception. They argue about their differences in philosophy. Bill wants to stay in the bunker, and Frank wants to build a community. He criticizes him for not letting him have some paint and some gasoline for the lawnmower. He wants to spruce up the house, but Bill is still in resource management mode.
You say resource management? So help me, I will run through one of your tripwires.
He explains that paying attention to detail is how we show love. He's not just living in an old, rundown house. He even wants to repair some of the nearby shops. And he says something really interesting here, that it's his street too, and he should let him love the street how he wants to. But Frank keeps saying that they're gonna have friends eventually, and that they want a welcoming place to invite them to. When Bill goes off on one of his post-apocalyptic rants, saying that there are no friends to be had, Frank reveals that he's been talking to a nice woman on the radio, which we now know is Tess.
I've actually been talking to a nice woman on the radio.
You what?
So we cut immediately to the moment that Joel and Tess meet Bill and Frank for the first time. You can see that his paranoia is off the charts when he puts his gun on the table pointing directly at Joel, in contrast to the first time that he meets Frank, when he even forgets that he has a gun. Tess points out that, gun aside, it's nice to sit down and have a civilized meal after so long, even if they don't end up working together, which tells me that this is a business meeting. Frank quickly reassures them that they are working together, regardless of what Bill says. And you can tell that Bill is definitely outside of his comfort zone here. He is not a social person, and when Frank invites Tess inside, Bill almost has a heart attack.
Let's go inside. Tess, I want to show you something.
Actually, I have been wanting to see inside.
Not inside.
Thank you. Yes.
Frank! Frank!
Now, Joel says something interesting here.
If mine brought strangers into our situation, I wouldn't be happy either.
Which is basically acknowledging that he knows that they are together. But noticeably, he stops short of comparing them to him and Tess. It seems like he doesn't want to put a label on what they have together. He reassures them that they are no threat and that they have more to benefit from each other. He knows that they need supplies, machine parts, etc. But Bill, of course, stubbornly says that they are self-sufficient and that they don't need them at all. Then Joel starts pointing out all the flaws in their camp and things that they can help with. We also see the bright yellow plant right in the middle, which is a constant throughout the episode, and you'll see it age as we go deeper and deeper into Bill and Frank's story. So cut to Frank and Tess, and they are actually coming up with the code system for the radio. This is when we get confirmation that 80s means trouble. Joel then finishes his assessment of their camp by saying that Fedra won't be coming up there at all, and that they are well protected against the infected, but sooner or later there will be raiders, people that raid people's camps for supplies, but of course Bill is stubborn, saying they'll be fine. Then we get our next time jump, which is another 3 years, and we can see that they are still madly in love. Frank, being the fit one, gets Bill to go jogging with him, and you can see the difference in the two. Frank surprises him with a bed of strawberries planted behind one of the houses, and he reveals that he actually traded one of Bill's guns for a packet of seeds. And this is where we get to see how much Bill has actually changed. Old Bill would have flipped out, but this time he decided to kneel down and enjoy fresh-grown strawberries for the first time in decades. This is probably the sweetest thing that he's had in a very long time. He humbly apologizes for getting older faster than him, and I love his response.
I like you older. Older means we're still here.
Frank has gotten Bill to slow down and enjoy life. It's not only about survival, but it's about enjoying the life you have. From the freshly painted house behind him, to the sweat collar, to the sweet strawberry in his mouth, Frank has made a lasting impression and has softened up Bill's heart to accept the things he cannot change and enjoy the time they have together. The thing about love is that it gives us fear of losing what we love. It opens us up to heartbreak and to the devastation and grief that comes with separation. But that shouldn't be a reason to shut yourself off from feeling love. In the end, having those memories and lived experiences you went through together makes you a better person. Then, almost as if Joel foretold the future, a group of raiders comes into their camp. One of them sets off one of Bill's traps, which shoots off a flamethrower, and you hear the guys burning outside. A few more explosions happen, and Frank has to run through the house when he hears some bullets entering the house. He grabs a gun and he runs outside to find Bill standing outside like a boss, taking them all out one by one. When he inevitably gets shot for being out in the open, Frank has to help him back into the house. While Frank is treating the wound, Bill starts naming things off to do in case he dies. He says to leave the gas on, and the fence will take care of the rest. And then he says something really interesting. He tells him to call Joel. He can't stay here alone. Frank refuses to give up on him and keeps treating his wound when Bill says,
Call Joel. He'll take care of you.
which really does show how much he actually trusts Joel, contrasting their first meeting when he put the gun on the table. Then we get the final time jump of the Bill and Frank storyline, and we see that they are now old. The house is still standing, the grass is cut, and Frank calls out for Bill, telling us that he actually survived the gunshot. We see that it's actually been 10 years, so that brings us to the current year of 2023. Frank looks like he's been sick for some time. He's in a wheelchair, and Bill pushes him back inside because he was getting cold. At this point, they have grown old together. We can see that Bill's old ways of asset management have gone out the window because we can see that Frank used to paint artistically. We see some half-finished paintings from their years together. He painted Bill a few times. He painted the strawberries in a bowl. You can see the level of detail he started with and how his paint strokes have been getting longer and more childlike. You can see that his motor functions are just not the same. He struggles to even hold the paintbrush correctly. When Bill comes up and gives him a wink, you can see the love that they have for each other. But as soon as they cut to the reverse angle and you can see the painting, you can see the level of detail is gone. He even struggles to create a simple face. Then Bill waters that same yellow plant that we saw earlier, and you can see that it's aged, just like they have. You can see throughout the time jumps that Bill has never stopped watering this plant. This is his routine. Even though he's changed and grown as a person, he's still the same old Bill. When we make it back to the dinner table, now we see a different scenario play out. Bill has to cut up the meat for Frank, while he struggles to even scoop soup and feed himself. He even drinks from a spill-proof container that looks strangely like a urine sample cup. He asks him if he has taken his pills, and he pulls out a baggie just like the one that Joel gave to the guard in the first episode, which tells you that Joel and Tess are probably the purveyors of these pills. It's sad to see him struggling just opening a simple bag. This is true love, my friends. Bill actually carries Frank into bed because he's unable to do so himself. Bill has actually become the caretaker, and he gladly takes care of the partner that has taken care of him for so many years. Here we also get to see another painting of Bill, and you can see that Frank was obsessed with painting him. In the morning, Bill wakes up and realizes that Frank is actually sitting in his wheelchair.
Took most of the night. I'm exhausted.
Bill immediately turns into dad mode and tells him that if he falls asleep in the chair, his feet are going to turn blue and he needs to go back to bed. But Frank reassures him that he's not going to fall asleep, and he says,
"'Cause this is my last day."
He explains that he has lived with this illness for so long that he doesn't want to do it anymore. Bill, of course, wants to keep him alive selfishly and ask him if he could go get help, but they both know that that isn't an option anymore. Apparently, there wasn't a cure for what he has before the world fell apart, which tells me it's a form of MS or ALS, which affects the motor functions. Bill is obviously very overwhelmed by Frank's decision, but he has to understand it. Sometimes we want to keep loved ones around for selfish reasons. We've become accustomed to having them around, and living without them is almost unbearable. But when someone is in constant pain and their quality of life is so low that they become unable to take care of themselves, you really have to consider the plea of mercy from them. They want to go out on their terms and make their last day on earth a good one, which is what Frank asks him to do. His last speech here is a testament to true love. The fact that not all their days together were good days. Some of them were bad days, but he says he had more good days with Bill than with anyone else. He just asked for one more good day. The best day.
Just give me one more good day.
When he sees the emotion on Bill's face, he decides to break the tension by asking for some toast. Even though they both kind of chuckle, this may be a nod to the grain infection in the beginning of the pandemic. Maybe now he realizes that because it's his last day, maybe it's time to eat bread again. He then asks him to take him into the clothing store, he'll pick out an outfit, and he wants to get married. He wants to enjoy one last dinner with him. And then, as a final act of mercy, he asks if he can crush up all of his pills and put them in the wine for one final toast. Then, he just wants to fall asleep in his arms. Bill is obviously overcome with emotion and says that he can't. This is the toughest thing you can ever ask anyone. Then he says something that is very similar to what he said earlier. He loved his house, but he asked Bill to let him love the house the way he wants to. Now he asked him if he loves him, and when he says yes, he says,
"Then love me the way I want you to."
Then we get the best trip down memory lane I've ever seen. He rolls him around the town, visiting the places that he will never see again, past the paintbrushes that will probably dry and never be touched again, the hole in the ground where they first met. Then, in front of the piano where they fell in love, they exchange rings and share one last kiss where they shared their first kiss. Finally, we see Frank in the same spot that he was sitting all those years ago. Bill brings out the same dish that he served on their first date, paired with the same wine, the plate adjusted the exact same way, and his reaction is exactly the same. He literally never got tired of Bill's cooking. As the night comes to a close, he pours 2 big glasses of wine without saying a word. He is completely silent throughout the process. He then pulls out the crushed pills and dumps it into the wine. Finally, he stirs it with a spoon. Still in contrast to how other people are living, this is fine dining with glasses and clean silverware. Even though Frank has made his decision, you can see the fear in his eyes. He asks if this will be enough, and Bill says yes, and you can see the internal struggle. His instinct as a human to survive is loudly calling him to stop, and it's with a heavy heart that he pushes aside instinct and embraces reason. You can see when this happens on his face, as he drinks the entire cup. As soon as Bill sees that Frank has actually gone through with it, he has made his final decision. He picks up his own cup and drinks it quickly. This is when Frank realizes that there were already pills in the bottle, and Bill's words here are so powerful.
This isn't the tragic suicide at the end of the play.
He realizes that he is old. His purpose was Frank, has been for some time, and without him there is no reason to go on living alone. He showed him life, full of riches, affection, and love. He changed him for the better, but now he doesn't see a future without him. Frank is angry, of course, voicing his disapproval, but also points out that objectively it's a very romantic gesture. Then their mood changes completely. They're almost free. They are going out together, having lived a full and fulfilling life amidst the post-apocalypse that surrounds them. Their final walk together brought me to tears. None of this was actually in the game, of course. We knew that Bill and Frank were a thing, but when we met Bill in the game, we quickly learned that Frank had hung himself after finding out he was infected, and was basically glossed over. Here we get a deeper story to the couple and how they lived, even though we didn't see it in the game. Finally, we cut to present day, where Ellie and Joel arrive at Bill's fence. Joel knows the code, of course, so he just lets himself in, but he notices that there's something not right. We see that the plant that Bill watered has died. The house is a bit more run down, so you can see some time has actually passed. Joel finds the front door unlocked, so he lets himself in, and we see that a few candles have actually burned themselves out. Frank's half-finished painting sits in the art room while their empty wine glasses sit on the table. The leftover food's already rotting with flies and maggots, and the empty bag of pills. Now here, Ellie finds a letter labeled for whoever, but probably for Joel. He knew that Joel would come once he heard the 80s song, although Joel didn't really hear it. It started playing after he had left. But here, Joel finds out exactly what happened. When she pushes the key across the table, you can see that the amount of dust that has accumulated on the table is a lot, meaning some time has actually gone by.
So they're dead?
Joel doesn't even want to read the letter. He just picks up the key and asks if they're dead. When Ellie starts reading it out loud, it's actually dated August 29th, 2023. It warns them not to go into the room, and that they left the window open so the house wouldn't smell. Although 2 dead bodies would stink up a house, even if the doors are open. He goes on to say that it probably is Joel because anyone else would have been killed by the fence, or one of his Home Alone traps. This is when he jokingly says that he never really liked him, but that they were like friends. So Joel never got to actually see the respect he had for him, the trust that he had built with him and Tess. He finishes by stating the lesson he had learned in his life. As we saw, he was actually happy when everyone left and he was alone. But there was one person worth saving, one person that made it all worthwhile, and he harps back to what Tess told him before she died. Save who you can save. They are both protectors. They are here to do just that, protect and help others, not to shut themselves out and simply survive. He leaves Joel all of his weapons, and he says to keep Tess safe. Seeing Tess's name on the paper made him realize that he was supposed to be her protector, and he feels like he failed. Bill continues and says that being alone is just not an option anymore. Finally, he heads to the garage and uncovers the truck that Bill has been keeping a secret. He even finds the ingredients and pieces for him to build his own car battery. After checking Ellie's bite one last time, he decides that he really doesn't have a choice now. He has to see this through. He is her protector, whether he likes it or not, and Ellie has actually given him a new purpose. He tells her that he's gonna take the truck and go find his brother in Wyoming. He used to be with the Fireflies, so maybe he can help locate the lab. Ellie tries to bring up Tess again, and he tells her that's rule number 1. If she's coming with him, she is never to talk about Tess.
Rule 1, you don't bring up Tess, ever. Matter of fact, we can just keep our histories to ourselves.
Rule number 2, don't tell anyone about her bite marks. They'll just shoot her. And rule number 3, she does what he says when he says it.
What you say goes.
She, of course, agrees, so they start loading up all their supplies. And this is when we get to see that Windows 2000 PC from earlier is the one that's been playing the music on the radio station. They notice it's actually playing the 80s music. It looks like it was programmed so that if Bill didn't reset a counter every few weeks, it would automatically start playing the song, alerting Joel and Tess. From the computer screen here, we can see that it's a custom audio player app that maybe he programmed himself with a copy of Notepad and Task Manager for some reason. Maybe he was monitoring his RAM usage. Ellie again wants a gun, and Joel says no. He actually doesn't take any of these guns, which tells me that he's going to start using Bill and Frank's house as another stash house. You know, I'm sure her grabbing some toilet paper is a nod to how people first reacted to our pandemic when they rushed the stores for the toilet paper, but who knows. Then a last little tidbit that we get towards the end is when Joel pulls out the box from the closet and he puts it on the table. It's actually labeled woman's shirts, which tells us that maybe there was a woman after all. Maybe one of Bill's secrets is that maybe he had another partner, maybe a daughter. She's apparently Ellie's size because she ends up pulling out and putting on the iconic red shirt that Ellie wears throughout the game.
They have hot water. I'm taking a shower. And then you're showering. Because seriously.
After a nice hot shower, Ellie breaks the grandfather clock for some reason. And when she goes exploring throughout the house, she actually finds one of Bill's guns. Now, she knows that he would absolutely object to this, so she quickly just throws it in her bag. This is when we see him freshly showered, wearing Bill's shirt that was passed down to Frank, and now to Joel. It's a very iconic shirt. Then they get in the truck and Ellie starts playing around with everything. This is literally the first time she's ever been in a pickup truck, even calling it a spaceship because it looks like a console. Now, he instinctively just says the word seatbelt, but to her, that really means nothing. So she kind of looks at him very confused as to what he meant by the word seatbelt. So he actually has to reach over, grab it, and put it on her. She's literally never seen a seatbelt.
Seatbelt.
And we finish with Ellie putting a tape in the tape player. So we actually finished the episode with the Linda Ronstadt's original rendition of Long, Long Time, and we see the truck driving off into the sunset. And the last picture we see is actually one of Frank's paintings of Bill, showing the legacy that these two gentlemen have left behind and how they contributed to Joel and Ellie's epic journey that they are still just getting started with. And that's where the storytellers decide to leave us for now, with a tragic love story of lives fully lived and realized, with purpose fulfilled and minds changed, with a glimmer of hope for Joel to fulfill his true purpose in life, to protect and to save who he can save, just as Bill did with Frank. And so another episode of Blue Box Nerd comes to a close with a message of hope and a plea for a like or a subscribe for more deep dives like this one. We're going to put out a lot more content like this, and we would love to have you follow along on the epic journey with us. Before wrapping things up, I just wanted to take a moment to talk to you guys, our listeners, our watchers. This podcast is a labor of love for us, and we're so grateful to have you along for the ride. In order for us to continue bringing you this type of content, we need your support, whether it's sharing the show with a friend, leaving a rating, or a review, or simply following us on social media. Every little bit helps. So if you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to see more like it in the future, please consider supporting us any way you can. All links are in the description down below. Your support means the world to us, and it's what allows us to continue doing what we love. Until next time, this is Anthony Rivera signing out. Stay nerdy.